The grand doors of the Lancaster mansion closed with a final, hollow thud behind Elena. She stood frozen for a moment, her hand gripping her daughter Maya's smaller one, trying to anchor herself in a reality that felt like a nightmare. The cold air of the early evening swirled around them, biting at their skin as if the universe itself had conspired against them. The words that had just been spoken by Victor, her husband of 15 years, echoed cruelly in her mind. I don't owe you anything. Leave. Elena had known something was wrong for months, perhaps even years, but she had never imagined it would end like this. In an instant, she had gone from being the wife of one of the wealthiest men in the city to a woman cast aside like old furniture. It was as if all her years of loyalty, sacrifice, and love had meant nothing to him. Her knees trembled beneath her, but she held firm, knowing that her strength was no longer just for herself, it was for Maya. Her 10-year-old daughter looked up at her, confusion and sadness swirling in her wide, innocent eyes. Maya clutched a worn-out teddy bear, a comfort in times of distress, though Elena knew that this moment was too big for such simple comforts. Elena crouched down and put on a brave face, trying to hide the turmoil roiling inside her. It's going to be okay, baby. I promise, she whispered, but even as she said it, a part of her questioned whether that promise could be kept. The mansion loomed behind them, an intimidating reminder of the life they were leaving behind. Its grand windows, now dark, reflected the fading sunlight like cold, unfeeling eyes. Elena could remember the days when the mansion had felt like a dream come true, a symbol of the success she and Victor had worked for together. But now, as she stood on the doorstep, it felt like a prison they had finally been released from. Victor Lancaster, the man she had once admired for his ambition, had changed. The Victor she had fallen in love with was not the one who had just turned his back on her and their child. In the early years of their marriage, before the business deals and high society parties, they had shared dreams. They had built a life together, or so she thought. But as Victor's wealth and power grew, so did his distance from his family. Elena had tried everything to keep their marriage intact. She had stood by Victor through the sleepless nights when he was building his empire, through the difficult moments when every decision seemed to rest on his shoulders. She had given up her own dreams to support him, becoming the perfect wife that society expected. Yet as his empire expanded, so did his detachment. He stopped seeing her as a partner and began seeing her as a burden, a reminder of a simpler life he no longer valued. Victor had grown colder in recent years. His affection had waned, replaced by a relentless focus on his business and image. Every interaction with Elena felt transactional, his love for her eroding as his obsession with his status consumed him. When she had tried to talk to him, to remind him of the love they once shared, he would dismiss her, his eyes always scanning his phone or his schedule, never meeting hers. Elena had held on for Maya's sake, hoping that one day Victor would realize what he was losing. But today, standing in front of the mansion with nothing but a hastily packed suitcase and her daughter by her side, Elena realized that the man she had married was gone. Victor had chosen his fortune over his family, and there was no going back. They had nothing now. No money, no home, no friends who would stand by them in the aftermath of this scandal. Elena knew how society worked. As soon as word got out that she had been abandoned, the social circles she once belonged to would shut her out. To them, she would no longer be the glamorous Mrs. Lancaster, she would be another discarded woman, irrelevant in the world of wealth and power. She squeezed Maya's hand tighter and led her down the long driveway. The cobblestones beneath their feet were uneven, much like the path ahead of them. Elena had no idea where they were going, but she knew they couldn't stay here. Each step felt heavier than the last as the weight of their new reality settled in. They were leaving behind the life they had known for years, a life filled with luxury but devoid of true happiness. When they reached the street, Elena paused. The city stretched out before them, a vast and indifferent place. She had grown up here, once knowing every corner, every street. But now it felt unfamiliar, as if it had become a foreign land while she had been locked away in the bubble of her privileged life. She glanced down at Maya, whose innocent gaze remained fixed on her mother. Elena realized that she had to keep moving, for Maya's sake. She had to be strong, even if she felt anything but. They wandered through the streets as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that mirrored the uncertainty they faced. Elena's mind raced, trying to figure out where they could go. Her thoughts shifted between panic and determination, but one thing remained clear: she had to protect Maya from the fallout of Victor's actions. In the days that followed, Elena found herself in a small, run-down apartment in a less-than-ideal part of town. The ceiling was cracked, and the sound of traffic echoed through the thin walls. It was a far cry from the mansion they had left behind, but it was a roof over their heads, and for that, she was grateful. The adjustment was harsh. Luxuries that had once been taken for granted were now out of reach. Simple things like warm water, fresh food, and clean clothes became precious. Elena knew they would have to start from scratch, and though the thought terrified her, it also gave her a strange sense of freedom. For so long, she had been trapped in Victor's world, trying to conform to his expectations, trying to be someone she no longer recognized. But now, standing in the dim light of their new home, she realized that this was a chance to rebuild, not just their life, but herself. Maya, for her part, adjusted quickly, her youthful resilience shining through. She missed her friends, her school, and the safety of their old life, but she never complained. She threw herself into her schoolwork, determined to make her mother proud. And in the quiet moments, when Elena felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, Maya would smile and say, "We'll be okay, Mom. We're stronger than you think." And so, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a shared determination to survive, Elena and Maya began their new journey. The road ahead would be long, filled with obstacles and uncertainty, but Elena knew one thing for sure: they had each other, and that was something no one, not even Victor Lancaster, could take away. The first few days after leaving the mansion were the hardest for Elena and Maya. They had no plan, no clear destination, only the overwhelming reality of their new situation. Every step they took seemed heavier than the last, as if they were walking through a fog of uncertainty. Elena had always thought of herself as a strong woman, but this was a test she had never expected. The life she had built, and the man she had trusted, had crumbled in an instant. The apartment they eventually found was nothing like the life they had left behind. The neighborhood was far from the manicured lawns and pristine streets of their old life. The building was old, with peeling paint and creaky stairs. Inside, the apartment was small and cramped, with barely enough space for the two of them. The air was thick with the musty smell of dampness, and the only light came from a single window that faced a brick wall. Elena sat on the edge of the worn-out sofa, staring at the few belongings they had managed to take with them. A suitcase of clothes, Maya's favorite teddy bear, a photo album that contained their happiest memories, before everything fell apart. It wasn't much, but it was all they had now. The silence of the apartment was heavy, interrupted only by the distant sounds of the city, sirens, the hum of traffic, and the occasional shouting from the street below. It felt so different from the life of luxury they had known, but at least they were together. Maya, despite her young age, seemed to sense the weight of the moment. She looked around the apartment with wide eyes, but she didn't complain. Instead, she placed her teddy bear carefully on the bed they would now share and turned to her mother. "It's okay, Mom. We can make this our new home." Elena smiled weakly at her daughter, though her heart ached. How could this be home? It was a far cry from the sprawling mansion where they had once lived. But Maya's words reminded her of what really mattered. Home wasn't the mansion they had lost. Home was the two of them, together. And no matter how difficult things became, she would make sure they would be okay. In the days that followed, life became a series of struggles that Elena could never have imagined. Every day was a battle to make ends meet. Elena had never needed to work before, Victor's wealth had always provided for them. But now, with no money and no safety net, she had to find a way to provide for herself and Maya. She had no formal qualifications, no work experience, but she couldn't afford to be choosy. She took on whatever work she could find, cleaning houses, waiting tables, even working late shifts at a convenience store. Each job came with its own set of challenges. Cleaning houses reminded her painfully of the luxury she had once lived in. She scrubbed floors and dusted shelves, knowing that once, those tasks had been done by the staff she had employed. Now, the roles were reversed, and she was the one on her hands and knees, cleaning up after strangers. Waiting tables was no easier. The constant rushing, the demands of customers, and the physical exhaustion that came with standing for hours on end took a toll on her body. But the hardest part was the shame she felt. She had once dined in fine restaurants, her every whim catered to. Now she was the one taking orders, her apron stained and her feet aching. But she couldn't let herself dwell on the past. She had to keep going, for Maya. Maya, on the other hand, was adjusting remarkably well. She threw herself into her schoolwork, determined not to let their new circumstances affect her studies. She had always been a bright child, and now her academic achievements became her focus. She spent hours at the small kitchen table, her textbook spread out in front of her, her pencil scratching across the pages as she worked through problems with quiet determination. Elena watched her daughter with a mix of pride and sadness. Maya was so strong, so resilient. She didn't complain about the things they had lost or the small apartment they now lived in. Instead, she embraced their new life with a maturity beyond her years. But Elena knew that Maya's strength came from necessity. They had no choice but to adapt, to find a way to survive in a world that had turned its back on them. The other parents at Maya's school had been quick to distance themselves. Elena had once been part of their social circle, attending charity galas and school fundraisers, always dressed in the finest clothes and with Victor by her side. But now, she was no longer one of them. The whispers and sideways glances followed her whenever she picked Maya up from school. They had no sympathy for a woman who had fallen from grace. In their eyes, she was a cautionary tale, a reminder that wealth could vanish as quickly as it came. But Elena refused to let the judgment of others break her. She had Maya, and that was all that mattered. They were a team now, a small but mighty duo navigating a world that was indifferent to their struggles. And though the days were long and the work was hard, there were moments of peace. In the evenings, after the noise of the day had settled, Elena and Maya would sit together, sharing simple meals and quiet conversations. They would laugh at silly jokes, and Maya would tell Elena about her dreams of becoming a businesswoman one day. Elena listened, her heart swelling with pride. Despite everything they had lost, Maya's spirit remained unbroken. As the months passed, Elena began to find a rhythm in their new life. The work didn't get easier, but she became more adept at juggling her various jobs. She learned to stretch every dollar, budgeting carefully so they could afford rent, food, and school supplies for Maya. It wasn't the life she had once known, but it was a life they could live with. And slowly, Elena began to realize that there was something freeing in the simplicity of it all. They didn't need grand mansions or expensive clothes to be happy. They just needed each other. One evening, as they sat together on the worn-out sofa, Maya turned to her mother and said, "You're my hero, Mom." Elena blinked back tears at her daughter's words. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired, worn down by the weight of their circumstances. But Maya's words reminded her that being a hero wasn't about wealth or success. It was about resilience, about surviving when the odds were against you. And in that moment, Elena realized that they were going to be okay. Life might not be easy, and the struggles would continue, but they had each other. And that was something far more valuable than any mansion or fortune Victor had taken from them. By the time Maya turned 16, life for her and Elena had settled into a steady, if difficult, routine. The struggles that had once seemed insurmountable were now part of the rhythm of their daily life. Elena's days were filled with long hours at her jobs, while Maya continued to excel in school, her mind sharp and focused on her future. Their small apartment, though far from luxurious, had become their sanctuary, a place where they could find peace from the harsh realities outside. It was a cold, gray afternoon when the letter arrived, a day that would change everything. Elena was just coming home from a long shift at the diner, her feet aching and her mind tired from the endless hours of taking orders and cleaning tables. As she entered the apartment, she noticed a thick, official-looking envelope resting on the small table by the door. She frowned, picking it up and turning it over in her hands. It was addressed to her, and the return address was from a law firm she didn't recognize. Her heart skipped a beat. She had learned that official-looking envelopes rarely brought good news. She took a deep breath and sat down at the kitchen table, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside was a letter from the law firm, informing her that her father, who had passed away several years ago, had left behind a trust fund for her. Elena blinked in disbelief as she read the words over and over again, as if they didn't make sense. Her father had been a humble man, a small business owner who had always lived modestly. He had never mentioned anything about a trust fund, let alone the kind of wealth the letter described. Her hand shook as she pulled out the attached documents, her eyes scanning the numbers. The trust fund contained a substantial sum, enough to change everything for her and Maya. Elena's mind raced, her thoughts jumping from shock to disbelief to confusion. Why hadn't her father told her about this? How had he managed to save so much money, hidden away in a secret account? Memories of her father flooded her mind. He had been a man of quiet strength, always working hard to provide for their family. He had owned a small business, a corner shop in their old neighborhood, and he had always preached the value of hard work and integrity. He wasn't the type to flaunt wealth, and he had never lived lavishly. Yet, here it was, a fortune he had set aside for her, without ever saying a word. As the shock began to wear off, Elena felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It was as if her father, even from beyond the grave, had found a way to protect her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she thought of all the nights she had lain awake, wondering how she would make it through another day. If only she had known about this money earlier, how different things might have been. But then again, maybe her father had known she would need it most when she least expected it. Elena sat there for a long time, the letter in one hand and her father's memory in her heart. This money could change everything. It could give Maya the life she deserved, the security that Elena had always dreamed of providing for her. But alongside the relief, there was something else, a flicker of temptation that she couldn't ignore. Her thoughts drifted back to Victor. The man who had abandoned them, left them with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the painful memories of a life they had once shared. For years, she had tried to push thoughts of him away, to focus on rebuilding her life with Maya. But now, with this money in her hands, the idea of revenge began to creep into her mind. It would be so easy. With this fortune, she could take back everything Victor had taken from them. She could rise above him, show him that they didn't need him, that they had survived and thrived without him. For the first time since that awful day, she felt like she had the power to strike back, to reclaim her dignity and her place in the world. But as quickly as the thought came, Elena pushed it away. Revenge had never been her way. She had always believed in taking the high road, in staying true to the values her father had instilled in her. This money wasn't about Victor. It wasn't about proving anything to him or anyone else. It was about her and Maya, about their future. She didn't need to stoop to his level to find peace. When Maya came home from school later that afternoon, Elena was still sitting at the table, the letter in front of her. Maya's face lit up when she saw her mother, but her smile faltered when she noticed the serious expression on Elena's face. "Mom? Is everything okay?" Elena smiled softly, waving her daughter over. Come here, sweetheart. We need to talk. Maya sat down across from her, her eyes filled with curiosity and concern. Elena slid the letter across the table, watching as Maya picked it up and began to read. She saw the flicker of surprise in Maya's eyes, followed by the same disbelief Elena had felt. When Maya finally looked up, her voice was a mix of wonder and confusion. How is this possible? I don't know, Elena said quietly. I had no idea about the trust fund. Your grandfather never mentioned it. But it's real, and it's ours. Maya's eyes widened as she stared at the numbers on the page. This is a lot of money, Mom. We could do so much with this. Elena nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision ahead of them. Yes, we could. But I want you to understand something, Maya. This money is a gift, but it doesn't change who we are. We've survived all these years without it, and we will continue to survive with or without money. It's important that we don't lose sight of what really matters. Maya nodded slowly, absorbing her mother's words. But Elena could see the wheels turning in her daughter's mind, the spark of ambition that had always been there now burning brighter. Maya had always been smart, always understood things beyond her years. And now, with the opportunity in front of her, Elena could see that Maya was already thinking about how to use this money, not just to survive, but to thrive. In the days that followed, Elena and Maya talked more about the trust fund and what they would do with it. Elena was cautious, wanting to use the money wisely, to create a stable future for the two of them. But Maya had her own ideas. She had always been fascinated by the world of business and finance, and now she saw the trust fund as an opportunity to make something of herself, to build a future that was bigger than the life they had once known. Elena watched her daughter with a mix of pride and concern. Maya was driven, ambitious, and focused in a way that reminded Elena of Victor, though she hated to admit it. But unlike Victor, Maya had a heart full of kindness, a deep love for her family that Elena knew would guide her decisions. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Maya's desire to succeed was fueled by something darker, an unspoken anger toward her father that had never fully gone away. And so, with the trust fund now in their hands, the course of their lives began to shift once more. What lay ahead was uncertain, but Elena knew one thing for sure: they were no longer powerless. They had the means to create the life they wanted, and no matter what path Maya chose, Elena would be there, supporting her every step of the way. By the time Maya turned 22, she had become a force of nature. The shy, quiet girl who had once clutched her mother's hand in fear had grown into a confident, determined young woman, ready to take on the world. Her ambition, once a small flame, had become a blazing fire. She had used the trust fund left by her grandfather not just as a safety net, but as a launchpad for something far bigger than either she or Elena could have imagined. Maya had always been a brilliant student, excelling in school even during the hardest times. While other children from more fortunate backgrounds had the luxury of coasting through their education, Maya had thrived on the challenges thrown her way. Her academic achievements had earned her a scholarship to one of the most prestigious universities in the country, where she pursued a degree in business. And it was during those years at university that Maya's true potential began to shine. From the first day she stepped onto campus, Maya knew that her time there would be more than just about getting a degree. She immersed herself in the world of finance and entrepreneurship, devouring every book, attending every lecture, and seeking out every mentor she could find. She joined business clubs, attended conferences, and interned with top firms. While other students were content to simply pass their classes, Maya was thinking ahead, already planning the future she wanted to build. Elena watched her daughter's progress with a mixture of awe and pride. She had always known that Maya was special, but seeing her thrive in such a competitive environment only reinforced that belief. Yet, with each success, Elena couldn't help but notice something else in Maya, a quiet, smoldering determination that bordered on obsession. It wasn't just about succeeding for Maya. It was about proving something, though Elena wasn't sure exactly to whom. Perhaps it was to herself. Perhaps it was to Victor. The trust fund had been a blessing, a way for Maya to invest in her dreams without the constant worry of financial survival. And Maya had used it wisely. By the time she graduated at the top of her class, she had already begun laying the groundwork for her own business, a tech startup that focused on innovative solutions for small and medium-sized enterprises. With her sharp business acumen and an unshakable work ethic, Maya quickly attracted investors, many of whom were impressed by her intelligence and vision. The early days of her startup were tough, but Maya thrived on the challenge. She spent long hours working on business plans, pitching to potential clients, and building a team that believed in her vision. There were setbacks, of course, every new business faced them, but Maya took each failure in stride, learning from every mistake and using those lessons to grow stronger. Elena often marveled at her daughter's resilience. Maya had a way of bouncing back from difficulties that reminded her so much of herself in those early days after Victor had left. Despite her growing success, Maya never forgot where she came from. The struggles she and Elena had endured during their darkest days were always at the back of her mind, fueling her drive to make something of herself. She had promised herself that she would never be at the mercy of anyone again, least of all her father. It wasn't about revenge, Maya told herself, it was about reclaiming the future that had once seemed so out of reach. By the time Maya was in her mid-20s, her startup had blossomed into a thriving enterprise. Her company had earned a reputation for innovation and reliability, and it wasn't long before larger corporations began taking notice. Maya, now the CEO of her own company, had become a rising star in the business world. Articles were written about her meteoric rise, interviews were requested by major publications, and she was frequently invited to speak at industry events. But while others saw her success as a remarkable achievement, Maya saw it as just the beginning. Elena, ever the proud mother, attended as many of Maya's events as she could. She watched from the sidelines as her daughter commanded rooms full of seasoned executives and investors, her poise and confidence undeniable. Maya had grown into a powerful businesswoman, a far cry from the little girl who had once clung to her hand in fear. Yet, as much as Elena was proud of Maya, she couldn't shake the feeling that her daughter was still carrying the weight of their past, and that unresolved pain might one day become a burden too heavy to bear. It was during one of those events, a particularly high-profile business gala, that Maya's path crossed with her past in a way neither she nor Elena could have predicted. Maya had been invited to a prestigious award ceremony, where she was to be recognized for her company's outstanding contributions to the tech industry. It was the kind of event that attracted the elite of the business world, the titans of industry who held sway over entire sectors of the economy. Elena had been excited for Maya, thrilled that her daughter was receiving the recognition she so clearly deserved. But Maya, though appreciative of the honor, had been unusually quiet in the days leading up to the event. Elena could sense that something was on her daughter's mind, but Maya had kept her thoughts to herself, deflecting her mother's questions with a smile and a quick change of subject. It wasn't until the night of the event that Elena realized why. As Maya and Elena entered the grand ballroom, filled with glittering chandeliers and elegantly dressed guests, Maya's eyes scanned the room with purpose. Elena, unaware of the true weight of the moment, admired the grandeur of the venue and the prestigious company in attendance. But Maya's focus was on one man, Victor Lancaster. Victor had been invited to the event as well, still a powerful figure in the business world. He was surrounded by his usual circle of wealthy, influential men, laughing and talking as if nothing in the world could touch him. But Maya saw through the facade. She had been waiting for this moment for years, ever since the day he had thrown her and Elena out of their home, leaving them with nothing. Elena followed Maya's gaze and froze when she saw him. The color drained from her face, and her hand instinctively tightened around Maya's arm. "Maya," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "We don't have to do this. Let's leave." But Maya was resolute. Her eyes locked on Victor, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight of her past collide with the present. She had spent years building herself up, becoming the woman she was now. And tonight, she would show him just how far she had come. "Mom," Maya said softly, turning to Elena with a fierce determination in her eyes. "I've been ready for this moment my whole life." Elena looked at her daughter, searching her face for any sign of hesitation, but there was none. Maya had made her decision, and no amount of persuasion would change her mind. Elena nodded slowly, her heart heavy with the fear of what was about to unfold. And so, with her mother by her side, Maya prepared to face the man who had abandoned them, not as a victim, but as a woman of power and success, determined to reclaim the legacy he had once tried to take from her. The night of the awards ceremony had finally arrived. It was a glittering event, the kind that only the most influential business leaders were invited to, titans of industry, wealthy investors, and high-profile CEOs. Maya stood in front of the mirror in her penthouse apartment, her reflection staring back at her with a mixture of excitement and anticipation. She adjusted the sleek, black gown she had chosen for the evening, a symbol of her power and sophistication. Tonight was more than just an awards ceremony for Maya, it was the culmination of years of hard work, determination, and a chance to confront the ghosts of her past. Her company had been nominated for the Businesswoman of the Year award, a prestigious honor that would solidify her place among the elite. But while the thought of receiving the award filled her with pride, her mind was focused on something else entirely: Victor Lancaster. She had learned weeks ago that her father would be attending the event. His name on the guest list had sent a jolt through her, but she had quickly steeled herself, knowing that this moment was inevitable. For years, Maya had buried the pain of her father's abandonment deep inside her. She had channeled all of her anger and resentment into building her company, determined to prove that she didn't need him, that she could succeed on her own. And she had. But the unresolved tension between them had always lingered, like a shadow following her every step. Tonight, she would finally face him. "Maya, are you ready?" Elena's voice called from the other room. Her mother had been supportive throughout Maya's journey, attending every important event, always by her side. But tonight, Maya sensed that Elena was worried. She had been quiet in the days leading up to the ceremony, and Maya knew why. Victor. Elena had never fully healed from the day he had thrown them out of their home, and the idea of seeing him again after all these years filled her with dread. Maya took a deep breath and stepped out of her room, her confidence unwavering. "I'm ready, Mom," she said softly, but with a fierce glint in her eyes. Elena looked at her daughter, a mix of pride and concern flashing across her face. Maya had grown into such a strong, determined woman, but Elena knew that facing Victor would reopen old wounds, for both of them. The car ride to the event was quiet, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. As they pulled up to the grand venue, the lights from the chandeliers inside cast a warm glow onto the sidewalk, where photographers and reporters gathered to capture the arrivals of the night's most important guests. Maya and Elena stepped out of the car, their heads held high, as cameras flashed around them. Maya's name was called out by reporters, eager to capture a glimpse of the rising star in the business world. But Maya barely heard them. Her mind was already inside, focused on the moment that lay ahead. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere was electric. The room was filled with the chatter of wealthy elites, the clinking of glasses, and the soft hum of music in the background. Maya scanned the room, searching for him. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her expression remained calm, composed. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, preparing herself for every possible outcome. And then she saw him. Victor stood near the stage, surrounded by a group of older businessmen, laughing and gesturing as though he didn't have a care in the world. He hadn't changed much in appearance, still tall, still dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, still carrying himself with that air of arrogance that had always driven her mother away. But as Maya looked closer, she saw something different. Time had softened him slightly. There were more lines on his face, a hint of gray in his hair, and for the first time, Maya saw him not as the invincible figure of her childhood, but as a man, flawed and mortal. Her grip on Elena's arm tightened as they made their way across the room. Elena glanced at her daughter, sensing the tension radiating off her. "Maya," she whispered, her voice trembling, "we don't have to do this. We can leave." But Maya was resolute. "I need to, Mom. I've been waiting for this moment for years." They moved through the crowd with purpose, Maya's presence undeniable as heads turned to watch her. She was no longer the abandoned daughter of a forgotten wife, she was a powerful businesswoman, a force to be reckoned with. And tonight, she would show Victor exactly who she had become. As they approached, Victor turned, his eyes casually scanning the crowd before landing on Maya. For a brief second, there was no recognition in his gaze, just the passing glance of a stranger. But then his eyes lingered, and confusion flickered across his face. It took him a moment, but Maya saw the exact second when recognition dawned. His smile faltered, and his eyes widened in shock. "Maya?" he asked, his voice uncertain, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Hello, Victor," she replied, her voice calm and measured. She deliberately left out the word father, refusing to give him the title he had abandoned so long ago. Victor's eyes darted around, searching the crowd for any sign of Elena, but she wasn't standing beside Maya. She had remained a few steps behind, watching from a distance. It was just Maya now, standing before him, poised and confident. "I didn't expect to see you here," Victor said, recovering quickly. He attempted to sound casual, but the tension in his voice betrayed him. "It's been a long time." Maya smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "I imagine you didn't. But then again, you probably don't spend much time thinking about the people you leave behind." Her words cut through the air like a knife, and Victor stiffened. But before he could respond, the voice of the event organizer boomed across the room, calling everyone's attention to the stage. The time had come for the evening's main event, the presentation of the Businesswoman of the Year award. Victor glanced at Maya, clearly uncomfortable, but the crowd was already turning its attention to the front. To his surprise, Maya began walking toward the stage, her stride confident and deliberate. Victor watched in confusion as she made her way to the podium. A murmur rippled through the audience as they realized who she was, Maya Lancaster, the CEO of one of the most successful tech startups in the country. As she took the microphone, the room fell silent, cameras flashing as the attention of the entire event was focused on her. "Thank you for this incredible honor," Maya began, her voice steady and clear. "It's a privilege to stand here tonight among so many accomplished people. I've worked hard to build my company, but I didn't do it alone. My mother, Elena, has been my constant support and inspiration. Without her, I wouldn't be standing here today." She paused, letting her words sink in. In the crowd, Victor shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of where this was headed. "When I was a child," Maya continued, her voice filled with emotion, "my mother and I were abandoned by someone who should have protected us, cared for us, and loved us. Instead, we were left with nothing, no home, no money, no future. But what we did have was each other, and that was enough." The audience hung on her every word, and Victor's face had turned pale. His confident demeanor had been replaced by growing anxiety. For years, he had carefully curated his image as a successful businessman and philanthropist, and now it was all on the verge of being shattered. "But life has a way of surprising you," Maya said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "What that person didn't know was that we had something far more valuable than money, a legacy left by my maternal grandfather. He left us a trust fund, hidden away for years, which I used to start my own company." There was a collective gasp from the audience as the revelation sent shockwaves through the room. Victor looked as though he had been struck, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I built my company from the ground up," Maya continued, her voice growing stronger, "just like my father once did. But unlike him, I didn't abandon my family in the process. The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Maya's eyes locked with Victor's as she delivered the final blow. And now, as of tonight, she said, her voice steady and calm, my company has completed the acquisition of Lancaster Industries. The audience erupted in gasps and murmurs, the revelation too shocking to comprehend. Victor's face drained of color as the full impact of her words sank in. He had lost everything, not just his company, but the power and control he had held over her for so long. Maya stepped back from the microphone, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had reclaimed not just her family's legacy, but her own sense of worth. And as she turned to leave the stage, the applause began. It started slowly, uncertain at first, but soon the entire room was clapping. The sound echoed off the walls, a reminder that Maya had won, not just the award, but the battle that had started the day her father had walked out on her and her mother. As Victor stood in the shadows, watching his daughter bask in the applause, he realized that he had lost far more than just a company. He had lost his daughter forever. The applause faded into silence as Maya stood at the podium, every eye in the room fixed on her. Cameras flashed, their bright lights reflecting off her poised figure. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on her, but she remained calm, her heartbeat steady as she prepared to deliver the speech she had rehearsed countless times in her mind. This was more than just her acceptance speech for the prestigious Businesswoman of the Year award. It was her opportunity to reveal the truth, to reclaim her power and her family's legacy. The room was grand, filled with the wealthiest and most influential figures in the business world. They had all gathered here to celebrate the year's top achievers, but none of them knew the story behind Maya's rise to success. None of them knew the pain and struggle that had shaped her, the betrayal that had driven her to this point. Tonight, they would learn. And Victor, standing somewhere in the crowd, would finally have to face the consequences of his actions. Maya took a deep breath, glancing briefly at her mother, Elena, who sat in the front row. Elena's eyes shone with pride and emotion, but there was also a hint of worry. She knew what was coming, and though she supported Maya's decision to speak her truth, she feared how it would affect them both. "Thank you for this incredible honor," Maya began, her voice steady and clear. "It's a privilege to stand here tonight among so many accomplished people. I've worked hard to build my company, but I didn't do it alone. My mother, Elena, has been my constant support and inspiration. Without her, I wouldn't be standing here today." A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. Elena smiled softly, though Maya could see the tension in her mother's face. Elena had always been her rock, standing by her side through every challenge and setback. And now, Maya was about to share the truth about what they had endured, something Elena had always tried to protect her from. "When I was a child," Maya continued, her voice growing more emotional, "my mother and I were abandoned by someone who should have protected us, cared for us, and loved us. Instead, we were left with nothing, no home, no money, no future." The room grew still as Maya's words hung in the air. She could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the audience leaning in, captivated by her story. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and she spotted Victor. He stood near the back, his face pale, his usual air of arrogance replaced by a look of growing unease. Maya's heart raced, but she kept her composure, refusing to let her emotions overwhelm her. "But what we did have," Maya continued, "was each other. And that was enough. My mother worked tirelessly to support me, to give me the opportunities she never had. She sacrificed everything to ensure I had a chance at a better life. And for that, I will always be grateful." In the front row, Elena blinked back tears. The years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the endless sacrifices, all of it was now being acknowledged in front of the very people who had once looked down on them. But this wasn't just a moment of recognition for Elena. It was a reckoning for Victor. Maya's gaze returned to Victor, her eyes locking onto his. He shifted uncomfortably, his hands clenching at his sides. For years, he had carefully cultivated his image as a successful businessman and philanthropist, always keeping the truth of his abandonment hidden from the public eye. But now, that carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. "Life has a way of surprising you," Maya said, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "What that person didn't know was that we had something far more valuable than money, a legacy left by my maternal grandfather. He was a humble man, a businessman who believed in hard work and integrity. He left us a trust fund, hidden away for years, which I used to start my own company." A collective gasp echoed through the room. The revelation sent shockwaves through the audience, their eyes widening in disbelief. Many had heard of Maya's meteoric rise in the business world, but few knew the personal history that connected her to Victor Lancaster, the powerful businessman who now stood frozen in place. Victor's face was ashen, his usual confident expression replaced by one of shock and disbelief. Maya could see the realization dawning on him. The money that had given her the foundation to build her company had not come from him, but from the very family he had discarded. He had thought he could walk away from them and their struggles, but here she was, standing in front of the entire business world, a testament to the strength he had underestimated. "I built my company from the ground up," Maya said, her voice growing stronger, more determined. "Just like my father once did. But unlike him, I didn't abandon my family in the process. I worked hard to prove that you don't need to destroy others to succeed." The room was silent, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone. Maya knew that this was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment where she could finally reclaim her story, her worth, and her legacy. Her gaze never wavered from Victor's as she delivered the final blow. "And now, as of tonight," Maya said, her voice calm and steady, "my company has completed the acquisition of Lancaster Industries." The room erupted into gasps and murmurs, the shock too overwhelming to contain. Victor stood frozen, his face drained of all color. The full impact of her words hit him like a physical blow. The company he had built, the empire he had once valued more than his own family, now belonged to the daughter he had abandoned. Maya had taken back everything he had tried to take from them, and she had done it with grace, intelligence, and integrity, qualities he had long since lost. Maya stepped back from the microphone, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had revealed the truth, reclaimed her family's legacy, and proven to herself, and to the world, that she was more than Victor's discarded daughter. She was a woman of power, success, and determination, and nothing could take that away from her. As she turned to leave the stage, the applause began. It started slowly, uncertain at first, but soon the entire room was clapping. The sound echoed off the walls, filling the space with the undeniable recognition that Maya had not just won the award, she had won the battle that had started years ago when her father had walked out on her and Elena. Maya descended the steps of the stage, the applause still ringing in her ears. She felt light, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For years, she had carried the burden of Victor's abandonment, allowing it to fuel her ambition, to push her towards success. But now, standing here, she realized that she didn't need his validation, his approval, or his love. She had already proven her worth to herself. As she made her way through the crowd, Elena rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her daughter. "You were amazing, Maya," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Maya smiled, tears welling up in her eyes as she hugged her mother tightly. "We did it, Mom," she said softly. "We finally did it." Across the room, Victor remained where he stood, isolated in the midst of the crowd. The man who had once held all the power now stood powerless, watching as his daughter basked in the applause and admiration of the very people who had once admired him. He had lost more than just his company tonight, he had lost his daughter forever. Maya had done it. She had stood on that stage, revealed the truth, and reclaimed her family's legacy in front of the people who mattered most in the business world. The applause had been thunderous, but as she descended from the stage, the weight of what she had just done settled over her like a heavy cloak. The confrontation with Victor that she had waited for her entire life wasn't over. It was only just beginning. As the applause died down and the guests began to return to their conversations, Maya made her way toward the exit, her heart still racing. Elena was beside her, the pride in her eyes unmistakable. But even as Maya moved through the grand ballroom, the sense of finality she had expected didn't come. There was still something left unsaid, something unresolved, between her and Victor. And she could feel his presence behind her, a looming shadow she couldn't ignore. Maya. Victor's voice rang out, cutting through the hum of the crowd. It wasn't the commanding voice she remembered from her childhood. It was cracked, almost desperate. She stopped in her tracks, her hand resting on the door handle as she considered whether to turn around or leave him behind once and for all. Part of her wanted to walk away, to leave him standing there alone, just as he had left her and her mother all those years ago. But another part of her, the part that had spent so many sleepless nights wondering why he had abandoned them, wanted to face him one last time. She needed to hear what he had to say. She needed closure. Slowly, Maya turned around to face the man who had once loomed so large in her life. Victor stood a few feet away, his face pale, his carefully composed mask cracking at the edges. For the first time, he looked vulnerable, like a man who had just realized the full extent of what he had lost. "Maya, please," Victor said, taking a hesitant step toward her. His voice was low, almost pleading. "I didn't know. I never imagined it would come to this." Maya tilted her head slightly, studying him with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You didn't know," she repeated, her voice sharp. "You didn't know that throwing us out, leaving us with nothing, would come back to haunt you one day? What exactly did you think would happen, Victor?" Victor winced at the sound of his name, as if hearing it from her lips was a blow he hadn't expected. "I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice faltering. I thought cutting ties would protect me. I thought I was doing the right thing." "The right thing?" Maya's eyes flashed with anger. "You left us with nothing. My mother worked herself to the bone just to keep us alive while you lived in luxury. You never once checked on us. You never cared." Victor opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. He looked down at his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. The confident, powerful man who had once ruled over everything around him was gone. In his place stood someone who was beginning to understand the full weight of his actions, and the consequences that had come with them. "I was wrong," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I was wrong about everything." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, filled with years of unresolved pain and anger. Maya could feel the weight of it pressing down on her, threatening to overwhelm her. But she had spent too many years waiting for this moment to let it break her now. "I spent so many nights wondering what I would say if I ever saw you again," Maya said quietly, her voice softer now but still laced with emotion. "But now that I'm standing here, I realize I don't need to say anything more. I've already won." Victor's face paled even further at her words. He looked like a man on the verge of collapse, his entire world crumbling around him. "I know I can't undo the past," he said, his voice strained. "But please, Maya, don't shut me out completely. I want to make things right. I can help you. We can rebuild what was lost." Maya's expression hardened. "Rebuild," she repeated, her voice incredulous. "There's nothing to rebuild, Victor. You were never there for me. You were never there for Mom. And now you think you can just walk back into my life, offer me money and power, and everything will be fine? It doesn't work that way." Tears welled up in Victor's eyes, and he took another step toward her, his hand outstretched as if to reach for her. But Maya took a step back, her body language firm and unyielding. She wouldn't allow him to close the distance between them, not now, not ever. You may be the great Victor Lancaster, Maya said, her voice calm but resolute. But you're not my father. You forfeited that right the day you walked away. You thought money could solve everything, but I've learned that the most valuable things in life aren't bought, they're earned. Victor's outstretched hand slowly fell to his side, his body sagging as though the last of his strength had left him. He had spent years building empires, acquiring wealth, and controlling the narrative of his life. But tonight, he had lost the one thing he could never control, his family. His tears, once unimaginable to Maya, now flowed freely down his face as the reality of his failure crashed down on him in a way that no financial loss could ever match. I'm sorry, Victor whispered, his voice so low that it was barely audible over the soft buzz of the crowd around them. I'm so sorry. Maya looked at him for a long moment, her heart a mix of pity and resolve. She had spent years imagining this moment, picturing how it would feel to finally confront him, to finally hear him admit that he had been wrong. And now that it was here, she realized that she didn't need his apology. She didn't need his validation. She had already found everything she needed within herself. I hope you find peace, Victor, Maya said softly, her voice steady and calm. But you won't find it in me. With that, she turned and walked toward the door, her steps steady and sure. Victor remained standing where he was, alone in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by people, but utterly isolated. The once mighty businessman had been reduced to a man who had lost everything that truly mattered. Outside, the cool night air greeted Maya as she stepped onto the street. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure wash over her. The confrontation had been years in the making, and now that it was done, she felt lighter, as though a burden she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. As she walked toward her car, Maya thought of her mother, who had always been the strong one, the one who had taught her to survive, to thrive, despite the odds. She smiled to herself, knowing that Elena would be proud of her tonight. She had faced her past, confronted the man who had tried to erase them, and she had emerged victorious, not just in business, but in life. Maya climbed into her car, the lights of the ballroom fading behind her as she drove away. She didn't look back. She had no reason to. Her future was bright, and she was ready to embrace it fully. For the first time in years, she felt truly free.